I think I might start collecting battle trophies for my set. Hello friends and enemies. Welcome to Horror and Inconvenience, where things are usually spooky and always weird. This is a quite belated spring reading wrap-up. This one is probably going to be pretty quick, famous last words, because I went through a major reading slump in March, and then I climbed out of that reading slump with a bunch of manga, and as I stated in my previous seasonal wrap-up, one of my ground rules with these is I only talk about a manga series if I've started or finished it, or if it's standalone, because otherwise then I would just be giving weird, unattached opinions about books from the middle of series, which nobody wants, especially since this isn't a manga channel. But I did start a lot of series, so we're going to talk about some of those. I also did a couple standalone reviews in this time, and so I'm not going to talk much about those books for obvious reasons. And I read a few things that are research for upcoming projects, so those will either get breezed by or left out, depending on whether the project is a surprise. So, spring reading wrap-up is going to be March, April, and May. Let's dive in! I'm going to start by talking about the manga series that I started and or finished during this time period. I started the current ongoing series, or at least the English publication is ongoing, even though we're adults, by the author of Sweet Blue Flowers. This is a Yuri series about two young adult women who fall in love, but they have lives. One of them is married and is just realizing that that might not have been her best decision. The other one is already out and is trying to carve out a life for herself in an extremely heteronormative society. And so it's about their journey. I have mixed feelings about this series. I think I'm caught up on what's published so far. Volume 4 should be coming out soon, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know, I'm pulled in a few directions, because there is something of a bizarre cheating storyline here, which I don't love, but at the same time, with queer stories like this, you just come across that from time to time. You know, heteronormativity is a hell of a drug, so I'm interested to see where it goes, and I'm reserving my judgment until I know a little more. But it's a well-written and very well-illustrated story, so I would recommend anyone who wants to come on this journey with me do. Okay, this is another, new adult Yuri series, and it is my current obsession. It's called Doughnuts Under a Crescent Moon. Volume 3 is coming out later this month. I check every day to see if it's come into my work yet. And, this is about two 20-somethings. Luckily, neither of them is married. They work at the same office, and they become friends through a series of happenstance. And what I really love about this series, aside from the characters, which are really sweet, is this character's raising her younger teenage sister, and the younger teenage sister ships it so hard, and she's always working to bring them together, and it's just a really charming found family story as well as a love story. And that really gives it a difference. It's a delightful story. I read the first volume of Limit, which is kind of like a Mean Girls meets Lord of the Flies story, about a girl who's a total bully at school, and then her school bus crashes in the wilderness, and she gets stuck trying to survive in cooperation with all the girls she bullied. This is a 6-volume series that came out in the early 2000s, and I do plan to get a hold of and read the rest. It's out of print, so it's going to take me a minute, but I'm excited. It's been a fun one so far. I read Volume 1 of Catch These Hands. Volume 2 isn't out yet. This is a really new series, and this is about two girls who were both bullies and in rival school gangs in high school, and they used to meet each other after school all the time to fight. They meet each other again as adults, and one of them says to the other, well, if you can't beat me in a fight, you'll have to go on a date with me instead. Because it turns out that they were fighting all this time as an excuse to see each other. So, pretty much perfect. No notes. I read the manga companion to Battle Royale, Angel's Border. This has two different stories in it, sort of the fleshed out stories of side characters. I thought it was really strong in a lot of ways. I have read Battle Royale. I read it right before I started this channel, so I haven't really talked about it on here. But I really enjoyed it, but I thought that one thing that it was missing was strong characterization. And this added to that a bit. I think it really added a dimension to the story that I'm happy to have. So if you like Battle Royale, you'll probably like this. I started the classic Yuri series Bloom Into You, which is about two high schoolers falling in love. It's a pretty basic love story. I mean, it's a classic for a reason. I'm working on volume 4 now. It's really sweet. You know, when you ask what Yuri manga you should read, this is on every starter list, and it's clear that it's for a reason. It's really nice. Just a nice story if you want something nice. I know a lot of people here aren't really tuning in for nice stories, but this is what got me out of my reading slump, so there we go. Finally, another high school Yuri, Failed Princesses, about a pretty popular girl who falls in love with a nerdy girl via the magic of makeovers. But it's actually a little more complex than it sounds. I found myself enjoying it actually a lot more than I thought I would, and I'm going to continue reading this series for sure. Okay, that was the manga. Let's talk about the nonfiction I read. One of the books is not being discussed here because it's for the beginning of an ongoing project. The next one is Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. This is a leftist critique of the state of work under late capitalism. It's been out for a long time, so it's been talked about. You may have heard of it or read it. Basically, it's about how our current system requires everybody to work for enough hours that there aren't actually enough necessary jobs to fill those hours, but you can't just let people not work. So we, as a society, have developed all these bullshit jobs to fill time. You know, a lot of them are administrative, middle management, that kind of thing. I worked at a call center, so I'm familiar with this. Yeah, it's a good book. I don't know, it's kind of a classic at this point. If you haven't read it, you should read it. The audiobook was really entertaining and easily digestible. Another one I read on audio was Disfigured by Amanda Leduc. It is a kind of non-fiction / memoir / literary analysis. It's about disability and disabled people in fairy tales and folklore and sort of how that contributes to the ableism in our society. You know, if you're interested at all in fairy tales as culture, and I mean, who isn't, then you should read this. It was a fascinating one, and, you know, as much as I noticed that there was ableism in fairy tales, I think this pointed out to me some key threads that I just had never seen, and I'm going to read one of my favorite genres with a more critical eye now, which, for some reason, is something I want out of life, so. And then the other supposedly nonfiction book I read was the James Patterson memoir, which I reviewed very thoroughly in my last video. Alright, let's talk about some fiction. I read From Below by Darcy Coates. I made a standalone review of that. I really enjoyed it, and now I am working on some other Darcy Coates reads. I read and deeply enjoyed Travelers Along the Way by Aminah Safi. This is in the same remixed classic series as A Clash of Steel, the lesbian treasure island that I absolutely adored, and I was really excited for this one to come out. It did not disappoint me. It is a Robin Hood remix with characters from the other side of the Crusades. The main character is a Muslim warrior girl who followed her sister when she snuck out of their village to join the Crusades. She's the Robin Hood character, Rahma al-Hud, and there's a Mongol warrior girl, there's a Jewish mad scientist kind of figure, there's an escaped Knights Templar conscriptee who's kind of their Friar Tuck figure. It's a delightful story of found family and kind of a Crusades heist. Basically, she steals a horse from the Queen of Jerusalem, and that leads to her being instrumental in negotiating an end to the then current conflict. What I really love about this is that it calls out white feminism in a really subtle and clever way, because there are segments that are from the point of view of Queen Isabella of Jerusalem, who was a Byzantine princess who was in charge of some faction or other. I don't care, it was the Crusades, everyone was wrong. During the very brief period of time when King Richard the Lionheart actually sort of nominally controlled Jerusalem. Again, it's the Crusades, and all the Europeans did a real bad job. But yeah, so there are some sections from Queen Isabella's point of view where she's really thinking like, oh, I'm gonna girl boss this, show them what a woman can do. But of course, she's in the wrong. She's one of the imperialists. And she's contrasted with all of these more marginalized female figures in the main storyline. It's a really well done book, and it's got very punchy, humorous, slightly anachronistic prose that I thought really worked for the tone of the story. Definitely worth a read. Okay, this one's probably my favorite of the bunch I'm talking about today. It's Spear by Nicola Griffith. She wrote Hild, which I really, really enjoyed, and I've been waiting for a follow-up to ever since it came out, because it ends on kind of a cliffhanger indicating that there's going to be a sequel. So far there isn't. I don't know if she intended one or not. But we did get Spear, which is wonderful. It's very short, as you can see, but really packs a punch. It's a lesbian retelling of the story of Parzival from the court of King Arthur. Everybody's queer, and there's a strong grounding in Celtic mythology. It's dark, it's magical, it's a little bit contemplative, and Griffith's style is pretty slow. Not in that it's not interesting, but that you really take your time with what's going on, really absorb the tone, which I love. And I just thought it was a really refreshing take on the Arthur myth. There have been a lot of queer King Arthur retellings, but I don't know, something about the flavor of this one just makes it work for me better than most of them do. You know what? It feels like a slightly less humorous and much less patriarchal take on T.H. White's Once and Future King. It has the same sort of deep, mythic, yet humane take on the legend, and I really enjoyed it. I want everyone to read it. You should read it. It's great. Okay, I don't have this one with me because it's currently in the possession of a friend who I basically am forcing to read it. Not that she minds, she's enjoying it so far. But it's Iron Widow. This is the YA release so far this year, as far as I'm concerned. Uh, wow. What a book. I briefly mentioned this in another recent video, but I really want to dig into it a little here, because I really think that this book is in some ways the next evolution of the kind of thing that the Hunger Games did when it was in its prime. Don't get me wrong, the Hunger Games is still great. Classic that I think is going to have legs for many years to come, and one of my favorite series of all time. But Iron Widow, well, first of all, it's not about white people. So that's a big plus. We honestly have enough books about white people in English. We just do. But it's a futuristic dystopian landscape that has harkened back a lot to ancient China for its cultural roots. So it very much echoes parts of both ancient and medieval China's culture and storytelling and hierarchies in a way that implies a kind of previous fascist takeover, right? Because fascists harken back to an imagined glorious past that's highly hierarchical and patriarchal. And so this is a future that looks to the past because the leaders are fascist. Okay, it's the same thing Suzanne Collins did with Panem and Ancient Rome. But anyway, the main character is a peasant girl who has bound feet and no interest in being married off to some rando and just boundless rage in her heart. And her older sister was sold off as a concubine pilot for these sort of sci-fi, sort of fantasy mechs that are piloted by pairs of people to fight aliens. And basically there's a male pilot and then the concubine pilot who he needs to draw strength from, but the concubine pilot almost always dies in the process. And so that's what happened to her sister. And so she actually goes off as a concubine pilot to try and kill the man who killed her sister. But she ends up being called to pilot with him, and her superior strength as a pilot kills him before she can murder him in his sleep. So she becomes an Iron Widow. That's one of these few concubine pilots who are stronger than the men. Although, of course, there's a lot more to it than that. Not a spoiler is that obviously the men aren't inherently stronger. They're given advantages in society. It's a parable. But this has a lot going for it. Mostly the furious anger that is sustained through the whole story is really the biggest draw for me. She's just so angry all the time, and it's so relatable. I mean, it's fantasy for teenage girls, right? If any of my viewers have ever been teenage girls, they'll know the constant seething under the surface of that experience. And it's all up front in this book, which is amazing. And it's also got a love triangle solved by polyamory, which is my favorite new trope. And I hope to see it almost as often as we saw all those boring, non-solved love triangles in older YA books. Because it actually makes sense. Yeah, if that's not enough to draw you to this book, I don't know. You should read it. What are you doing? I also read Nimona, the YA graphic novel borrowed it from a friend at work. It's about a shape-shifting villain sidekick, another angry teenage girl. Very good, very queer story that kind of reverses some fantasy tropes. I don't have a ton to say about it, but it's definitely worth a read. It's an experience. I finished reading Snagglepuss Chronicles, Exit Stage Left. This has been out a while, and it's from a weird thing DC Comics did, where they took some Hanna-Barbera characters and made them into, like, weirdly serious, gritty comics. But I really loved this one. This imagined Snagglepuss as, essentially as Tennessee Williams. He's a gay playwright living in mid-century New York, and he gets caught up in McCarthyism and the Lavender Scare. And, it worked so well. Honestly, I was shocked. This is a very good book. It's a standalone, which is good, because I don't think it would have gotten continued if that had been the intention. But, yeah, it's a story of McCarthyism and of the tragedy of the 1950s. Where culture imploded because all of the artistic elements in society were attacked at once. And it keeps some of the whimsy of the original cartoons, but obviously adds depth, and I think the juxtaposition between that whimsy and the seriousness of the subject matter really works. It's a great read, really, and it's pretty dark. So don't expect lighthearted fun when you pick it up. That's kind of what I expected, and I actually put it down for a really long time, because I just wasn't in the right headspace for it, but I finally finished it, and I'm so glad I did. Definitely recommended. If you can get a hold of this, read it. I read a young adult novella called The Game by Lindsay Miller. I really liked Lindsay Miller's Mask of Shadows duology, which was about a gender-fluid assassin in a fantasy kingdom. Highly recommend that. The Game was a pretty boring mystery story. I don't recommend it, so I'm just going to skip over it. I think Lindsay Miller can do better and will continue to do better in the future. I read this young adult novel, My Dearest, Darkest. It's kind of The Craft meets Eldritch Monster vibes. It's about a girl who goes to a new private school, but her parents died in a car crash right as they were driving back from her interview the previous spring, and she almost died but survived. Or did she? Maybe something brought her back, and maybe that something wants something from her. So all of this, and she gets embroiled in a sort of cultish group of popular girls who also become involved with this mysterious being that wants darker and darker sacrifices from them in exchange for what they want out of their lives. Also, it's got a queer romance in it. It was great. I just kept turning pages until it was over. It would be a really fun Halloween read to pick up this fall, I think. Very popcorny, very spooky. I enjoyed it. Don't be fooled by the cover. The cover sucks, but it's actually pretty good. I already reviewed Sedating and Elaine in a separate video, but this is a literary fiction book I was really excited for that turned out to have just an absolutely terrible ending, and I was really disappointed with it because it had so much potential. You can find more about that in my review if you're interested, but I don't know. Literary fiction just keeps hurting me, and I keep going back, and I should maybe stop. And then the final thing I'm going to mention in this wrap-up is that I read Bloodchild and Other Stories by Octavia Butler. I actually read this because one of the short stories in this book is relevant to a project I'm working on this summer, and that video will be coming. But I read the whole book. This was my first Octavia Butler. And, I mean, people were not lying. She is a wonderful writer. I was obviously impressed because she's impressive. I I really and her short stories are probably an odd introduction to her. I get the sense she's more of a novelist, prefers to run with an idea and expand on it. So I am going to read one of her series coming up for the same project, actually. And I'm really looking forward to it. I found her writing style really engaging, and her ability to expound on a sci-fi concept and do some really full and clever world building without getting mired in the details is really impressive. What a masterful writer. So loved it. Yeah. Now I've read some Octavia Butler, and I'm happy that I have. Okay, so that'll about do it for this wrap up. Like I said, not my most prolific months, but I had a good time, and I have some good stuff coming up. I'm actually, since it's June right now, I'm actually going to do a Pride Month reading wrap up, and so my summer reading wrap up, my next one, that'll come out probably in September, will also probably be a pretty short one since it'll mostly cover July and August. So that's what's up. Thanks for being here and caring what I read. Thanks also for the fact that I have over 80 subscribers now. I'm getting toward that 100 mark. I understand people often do something for 100 subscribers. I have no idea what would be interesting for that, though. So if anyone has an idea of something they'd like to see or something that might be fun to celebrate when I get there, please suggest it in the comments, and I will probably do it. All right. Well, happy Pride Month. Sorry about the weather. Sucks about how the world is ending. But yeah, let's all have a good time at those festivals.